The palace was flawless that night. Every light fell where it had for centuries. Every step echoed with rehearsed dignity. Applause rose and faded on cue, as if even sound understood its duty. This was monarchy at its most disciplined. Perfect, unbroken, unquestioned, until one detail refused to obey. Beneath the sweep of ceremonial silk, where no eye was meant to linger, a faint stain began to spread. Small, quiet, almost respectful in its restraint. The kind of imperfection protocol is designed to hide. A single guard saw it. He did not move. He did not speak. Discipline held him still as his training translated danger into silence. Because in this place, panic is treason and restraint is survival. Princess Charlotte continued to smile beneath the chandeliers, unaware that something sacred had already been violated, or perhaps aware and already learning the oldest lesson of royalty. Endure first, ask later. Prince William felt the shift before anyone said a word. Not fear, something colder. The unmistakable sense that a line had been crossed not by accident, but by intent. Behind stone walls built to protect bloodlines, the question was no longer what happened. It was who dared to do it. The palace was flawless that night. Every light fell exactly where it had for centuries. Every footstep echoed with rehearsed dignity across marble floors polished by history. Applause rose and softened on cue, restrained, respectful, never excessive. The monarchy, in its purest public form, was performing itself with surgical precision. Nothing here was accidental. The chandeliers burned warm gold above a gathering of diplomats, dignitaries, and senior members of the royal household. Silk gowns whispered against stone. Metals caught the light. Cameras flashed only when permitted. Even the air felt regulated, as though disorder itself had been barred at the gates. Along the perimeter of the hall, ceremonial guards stood immobile, crimson uniforms, white gloves, eyes forward. Their stillness was not passive. It was active control, the final visible layer of security system designed to never be noticed. Among them, one guard adjusted his focus, not his posture, not his stance, just his attention. His gaze dropped briefly to the floor-level movement near the dais where the royal family stood. Princess Charlotte was positioned slightly forward, her ceremonial dress flowing in soft ivory layers, embroidered with symbols older than most nations. She stood with practiced composure, chin lifted, expression calm. And there, at the hem of the silk, was the anomaly, a faint discoloration, a shadow that did not move with the fabric, a subtle darkening where white should have remained untouched. The kind of detail that would dissolve into insignificance for anyone not trained to read silence as warning. The guard's breathing did not change. Discipline did not allow reaction. It allowed recognition. Blood, not pooled, not dramatic, just enough to matter. He did nothing that could be seen. Instead, his left hand tightened once against the seam of his glove, a coded signal, absorbed instantly by the guard 2 positions down. Another shift followed. A recalibration, so minor it vanished into ceremony. Within seconds, the palace security apparatus adjusted its posture around the royal family. Invisible to guests, seamless to cameras. The applause continued. On the dais, Princess Charlotte smiled. She did not move. She did not falter. She did what she had been trained, by bloodline and expectation, to do. Prince William felt it before he understood it. Not fear, not panic. A tightening, a pressure behind the sternum that had nothing to do with the room, and everything to do with instinct. He glanced sideways, his expression unchanged, and met the eyes of the senior palace security officer stationed near the eastern archway. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Something had gone wrong. The officer's chin dipped almost imperceptibly. William's jaw set. The exchange lasted less than a second, but its meaning was unmistakable. A protocol breach had occurred, and it involved the heir. A lady-in-waiting approached Charlotte with the smooth confidence of routine. Her hand rested gently at the princess's elbow. To the untrained eye, it looked like a simple adjustment, guidance for a young royal during a long engagement. But this was extraction. Charlotte was guided away from the dais, her movement timed perfectly with a rise in applause and a shift in the program. No announcement, no interruption. The monarchy did not stumble. as she disappeared through a side corridor reserved for private royal movement. The palace absorbed the moment like stone absorbs heat, slowly, invisibly, and with consequence. The corridor beyond was quieter. The lighting softened. The air cooled. Charlotte's steps slowed only when the doors to the private medical wing closed behind her. Here, history lived differently. This was not a place of spectacle, but of containment. Illnesses treated without rumor. Injuries documented without exposure. Heirs protected at any cost. She sat on the edge of a medical table, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. The physician knelt to examine the injury, voice low, expression controlled. The cut was shallow, but precise. Clean, not the result of a fall, not the careless scrape of childhood. It had intention. Prince William entered moments later. The door sealed behind him with a muted sound that seemed to press the air inward. He crossed the room in silence, his eyes never leaving his daughter. The blood was clearer now against white gauze. Real, undeniable. He said nothing at first. In that silence, something ancient stirred, the instinct of a father colliding with the weight of a future king. The crown was not on his head yet, but its burden was already present. This was not merely a security lapse. This was a violation. Outside the medical wing, the palace shifted into a different rhythm. Incident logs were quietly opened, timestamps reviewed, guard rotations reconstructed. Every action followed procedure, so strict it bordered on ritual. Questions were not asked aloud. They were inferred. Staff moved with heightened precision. Eyes lingered a fraction too long. Whispers traveled without sound. Within these walls, suspicion was dangerous, not because it was false, but because it could be true. Somewhere else in the palace, Camilla continued her evening. She moved through conversation with ease, her posture composed, her expression warm but unreadable. She laughed softly at the appropriate moments. No one questioned her presence. No one ever did. But memory was already working against the present. A guard recalled her standing near Charlotte shortly before the ceremony resumed. Close enough to speak quietly. Close enough for a private word. An unremarkable detail. Until it wasn't. Prince William stood alone in a narrow gallery lined with portraits of monarchs who ruled through silence and survival. Faces that had endured wars, scandals, and bloodshed without ever breaking public composure. The camera lingers on his reflection in the glass. Power had been abused. Duty had been tested. And the most terrifying realization was not that harm had occurred, but that it had happened politely, quietly, within the safety of ritual. As Charlotte's dress was removed and sealed for forensic examination, folded with the care reserved for relics and evidence alike, the palace held its breath. This was no longer about injury. It was about trust. Because if the air could be harmed without noise, without chaos, without witnesses, then the danger was not beyond the gates. It was already inside. As the sealed evidence disappears into restricted custody, one unspoken truth remains. Camilla was near the child, and the question no one dares to voice is the one that will fracture everything next. The palace did not wake the next morning. It resumed. Dawn filtered through tall windows with practiced indifference, illuminating corridors that had already decided how much truth they would allow. The night's disruption, so carefully concealed, had not fractured routine. Breakfast trays moved on schedule. Flags were raised at the precise minute. Guards rotated posts with ceremonial exactness. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The private medical wing remained sealed under restricted classification. Princess Charlotte slept under observation, her injury documented in language deliberately stripped of emotion. The report was factual, controlled, blood loss minimal. No immediate threat, but one line, buried deep within clinical phrasing, carried weight no protocol could soften. The injury is inconsistent with accidental contact. Prince William read it alone. He stood at a narrow desk beneath a portrait of a monarch who once ruled through 3 silent crises and never spoke of any. William's hand rested flat against the paper, as though anchoring himself to reality. His expression did not shift, but something inside him recalibrated. This was no longer a matter of protection. It was a matter of judgment. He summoned only one person. The senior palace security officer arrived without announcement, closing the door with deliberate care. His uniform bore no unnecessary decoration. His authority was not symbolic. It was operational. He had served under 3 reigns, survived transitions, buried truths that history would never record. They did not exchange pleasantries. "The logs," William said quietly. "They're being compiled," the officer replied, "under the oldest codes." That mattered. The oldest codes meant discretion without deviation. It meant no digital transmission, no advisory committees, no external oversight. Everything would be handled internally by oath-bound individuals whose loyalty was to the crown, not to comfort, not to optics. They moved into a secure chamber buried deep within the palace structure. The room had no windows. Its walls were lined with archival cabinets and analog record systems designed long before breaches were imagined digitally. This was where the monarchy examined itself. The first documents were routine: guard schedules, corridor access times, medical response intervals. Everything aligned, too clean to be reassuring. William listened as the officer narrated the sequence of events in a voice trained never to accuse. Extraction protocol was initiated at 2047. No disruption logged. The injury was discovered by visual anomaly detection from perimeter guard position C-12. William nodded once. Continue. They moved deeper. Restricted corridor access logs were reviewed next, those leading to private wings, children's quarters, and ceremonial staging areas. Access here was governed not merely by clearance, but by ritualized authorization. Every entry required a layered approval: time window, purpose, and countersignature. Most entries were intact. One was not. A 30-second access window had been granted to a corridor adjacent to the children's wing, an area that should have been locked down entirely during the ceremony. The authorization line was unsigned. William's eyes did not leave the page. "Unsigned?" he asked. "Yes," the officer replied, "which is not possible under standard protocol." "Then how was it approved?" The officer hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from awareness. It originated from a private office override. Silence settled into the room. There were only a handful of offices with override authority, fewer still that could bypass countersignature requirements under ceremonial conditions. Camilla's was one of them. The officer did not say her name. He did not need to. William leaned back slightly, the chair beneath him unmoving. His face remained composed, but the weight pressing against his chest had changed shape. This was no longer speculation. This was structure. They continued. Guard rotations revealed minor adjustments made earlier that day. Nothing dramatic. A swap here, a shortened post there. Changes small enough to appear administrative. But together, they formed a corridor of opportunity. Who authorized the rotation changes? William asked. They were submitted as standard optimization requests. The officer replied. Approved through the same private office channel. The palace did not accuse. It corroborated. Every detail added mass to a conclusion that could not yet be spoken aloud. William stood and walked slowly along the archival cabinets. His fingers brushed the spines of sealed volumes, records of crises that never became history. This institution knew how to survive scandal. It had done so by burying truth with ceremony. But this time, the truth involved a child, and that changed everything. A confidential medical follow-up arrived later that day. It was delivered by hand, placed directly into William's possession without intermediary review. The language was clinical, but the implications were severe. The injury had been inflicted by a sharp object, not a blade meant to kill, but one meant to mark. Intent without escalation. William closed the folder. Across the palace, staff felt the pressure shift. Doors closed more softly. Conversations ended more quickly. Everyone sensed that the rules were being tested, not broken yet, but examined. Camilla noticed. She had survived long enough to recognize institutional tension. She adjusted her movements accordingly. Less visibility, more private correspondence. Her office remained active, but carefully so. She requested no meetings. Neither did she explain herself, which, in this environment, was its own kind of statement. Late that evening, William returned alone to the secure chamber. He reviewed the unsigned authorization again. He studied the timestamp, the originating terminal. Everything pointed to access that was technically permitted and morally indefensible. This was how the monarchy protected itself. Not with innocence, with plausibility. The senior officer returned, placing a final document on the desk, an internal memorandum, and signed, undated, circulated weeks earlier through Camilla's office. It referenced heritage contingencies and lineage preservation protocols. Language so archaic, it bypassed modern oversight. William read it twice, then a third time. It spoke of sacrifice, of difficult decisions made in silence, of legacy outweighing individual cost, not orders, suggestions, guidance, the kind that allowed harm to happen without command. William closed his eyes briefly. The rules that governed this place had always existed to preserve the crown, but somewhere along the way, they had learned to protect power at the expense of innocence. And now those rules stood before him, unbroken but exposed. The palace would not act unless he forced it to, and forcing it would mean confrontation, not just with Camilla, but with the institution itself. As William sets the unsigned authorization back into its sealed folder, one truth hardens beyond denial. The corridor was opened deliberately, and the only remaining question is whether authority will finally answer to blood. The palace was quieter now, but not calmer. Silence had settled into the corridors with intent, the kind that presses against walls and listens back. Every footstep seemed aware of itself. Every door closed as if it might be overheard. The institution had entered a defensive posture, not outwardly, but internally, where truth was weighed against survival. Prince William walked alone. The route he took was deliberate, not the public corridors lined with portraits and ceremony, but the inner passageways reserved for authority. Narrower, older, untouched by renovation. These halls were built for moments when monarchy confronted itself. Camilla's private sitting room lay at the end. 2 guards stood outside, posture rigid, eyes forward. Their presence was ceremonial, not defensive. She was still untouchable by assumption alone. William paused before the door. For the first time since the incident, the weight of 2 roles collided without buffer. He was not only a future king invoking protocol. He was a father standing at the edge of something irreversible. He entered. The room was warm, lit by low lamps and filtered daylight. Everything inside spoke of continuity. Family portraits, polished wood, carefully chosen stillness. Camilla stood near the window, her back turned, hands folded lightly at her waist. She did not turn immediately. "You asked for privacy," she said calmly. "That suggests seriousness." William closed the door behind him. "It suggests truth," he replied. She turned then, her expression composed, eyes sharp with decades of learned balance. She did not offer a seat. Neither did he take one. They stood across from each other, bloodline and authority occupying the same air. "You understand," Camilla began, "how dangerous even the appearance of suspicion can be." "I understand," William said, "how dangerous silence becomes when it's mistaken for loyalty." A fraction of tension crossed her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. This palace survives because it knows what not to pursue. And it collapses, William said, when it forgets who it exists to protect. He placed a sealed medical report on the table, between them. She did not reach for it. The injury, he continued, was not accidental. Camilla exhaled slowly, as if disappointed, not surprised. "You're asking the wrong question," she said. "Children fall. They wander. Even here." This was not wandering. Intent is a strong word. "So is authorization," William replied. That landed. Camilla's gaze hardened, not defensively, but strategically. "You're young enough," she said quietly, "to still believe authority is simple." William stepped closer. "And you've been here long enough," he said, "to know that precedent does not equal permission." The space between them tightened. Camilla moved at last, walking toward the table, her fingers brushing the edge of the report without opening it. "You're thinking as a father," she said. "I respect that. But this crown has never survived on sentiment." "It has survived," William replied, "because someone drew lines when others refused to." She met his eyes. "Lines move," she said. "Legacy adapts. There are truths children are spared, and truths institutions cannot afford to acknowledge." William's voice lowered. And which truth justifies a blade? The word hung there, unspoken before now. Camilla did not react outwardly, but something behind her eyes shifted. Calculation giving way to confrontation. You think this was cruelty, she said. It was correction. William felt it then. Not anger, not shock, but clarity. You speak of tradition, he said, as though it absolves consequence. I speak of survival, Camilla replied. This family exists because difficult decisions were made quietly, again and again. And how many children paid for that quiet? William asked. Silence answered him. Outside the room, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Camilla straightened. You are not king yet, she said carefully. And until you are, some matters remain beyond your reach. William nodded once. Then hear this, he said. As father, I will not be restrained, and as heir, I will not be warned twice. She studied him now, not as a subordinate, but as a variable. You would fracture the institution, she said, over something that left no permanent damage. William's voice did not rise. You call it damage, he said. I call it intent. He turned to leave. Behind him, Camilla spoke. Quietly, sharply. There are reports you haven't seen. William stopped. A guarded medical addendum, she continued. Sealed beyond your current clearance. It reframes the incident. William turned slowly. Release it, he said. That would require council consensus. Then convene it, William replied. Camilla's mouth tightened. You would expose this family to scrutiny it cannot control. I would expose it, William said, to itself. He left without waiting for permission. The palace reacted immediately. Staff sensed escalation. Guard posts shifted. Communications tightened. Something rare was happening. Authority was being challenged from within, not for power, but for principle. That night, the medical addendum arrived. William read it alone. The report confirmed what he already knew, and added what he feared. The injury bore signs of restraint. Not forceful, controlled, a moment where choice existed. And restraint was used not to protect, but to limit harm deliberately. A line crossed, then measured. William closed the file. He did not sleep. By morning, loyalties had begun to show themselves in absence rather than presence. Some staff avoided his path. Others lingered too long, silently offering alignment without words. The palace was dividing, not loudly, but inevitably. William stood at the window of his private office as dawn spread thin light across the grounds. The crown loomed not as destiny, but as responsibility, when he could no longer delay. He summoned the senior palace officer. Prepare the council, William said. Sealed. Emergency authority. The officer hesitated only once. That has not been done and I know, William replied. That's why it matters. The order traveled through channels built for crisis. Bells were not rung. Announcements were not made. But doors opened that had remained closed for generations. Camilla would be summoned. So would the truth. And the institution that had hidden behind silence would be forced to choose, whether authority served legacy or whether legacy finally answered the innocent. As emergency council is ordered into motion, the palace crosses a threshold it cannot retreat from. Because once authority questions itself aloud, silence can no longer protect anyone. The council chamber had not been open for urgency in decades. Its doors, thick oak, reinforced with iron bands dulled by time, swung inward without ceremony. No announcements, no witnesses. Only those summoned by sealed authority crossed the threshold, each aware that entry alone altered the balance of silence the palace depended upon. Prince William entered last. The room was circular by design, a geometry meant to deny hierarchy while enforcing accountability. The table at its center bore no ornamentation. Candles were unnecessary. The lighting was precise, modern, clinical. This was not a place for reverence. It was a place for reckoning. Those present took their seats without instruction. Senior legal counsel, the palace physician general, 2 security directors bound by separate oaths, an archivist whose role existed solely to remember what others were ordered to forget, and Camilla. She sat composed, hands folded, posture immaculate. Her expression revealed nothing, not anxiety, not defiance, only patience. the kind cultivated by those who survive institutions by becoming indistinguishable from them. William did not sit immediately. "The council is convened," he said, voice steady, "under emergency authority concerning a breach involving the royal heir." No one interrupted. "Proceed," the legal counsel said quietly. William placed a sealed folder on the table. "This chamber exists," he continued, "to examine truth without spectacle. What follows will not leave this room, unless it must." The physician general opened the folder, reading silently. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The injury," William said, "was deliberate." The words did not echo. They sank. Security Director 1 shifted. "Deliberate implies intent. Intent requires attribution." "That is why we are here," William replied. The archivist spoke next, voice dry with age. "There are precedents." William looked to him. "List them." The archivist hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from gravity. "3," he said, "over the last century. All involving minors. All resolved internally." Camilla did not move. "What was resolved?" William asked. "And what was erased?" The archivist's eyes lowered. "Both." Files were passed across the table. Thin, restrained, devastating in implication. Each detailed an incident reduced to language so neutral it bordered on denial. Each concluded with the same rationale: preservation of stability. The physician general cleared his throat. "These were not accidents," he said. "They were interventions." Silence thickened. William felt it then, the slow accumulation of understanding. This was not an anomaly. It was a pattern refined by time and protected by reverence. Camilla finally spoke. "You see now," she said calmly, "why caution matters." William turned to her. "I see," he said, "that silence was taught." Security Director 2 leaned forward. "Authorization for the recent corridor access originated from your office." Camilla inclined her head slightly. "My office processes many requests." "This one bypassed Countess' signature," the director replied. "That requires intent." Camilla met his gaze. "It requires trust." William raised his hand once. The room stilled. "The memorandum," he said, "on heritage contingencies, who drafted it?" The archivist answered. "It circulated from the Queen Consort's office." Camilla did not deny it. "It was guidance," she said, "not instruction." "And guidance," William replied, "creates permission." Camilla's voice remained even. "This family has endured because someone was willing to make decisions others could not." "At what cost?" William asked. She paused then. "Not long. Just enough. At the cost required." The physician general spoke again, more firmly now. "The injury was restrained, controlled. It suggests a deliberate choice to harm without escalation." Camilla nodded. "Exactly." William's breath slowed. "You're describing mercy," he said. "I'm describing restraint," she replied. "You're describing harm," William said, "measured to remain deniable." The archivist slid a final document across the table. A letter, handwritten, dated years earlier, signed, Camilla's signature. The language was unmistakable. It referenced the necessity of corrective moments to preserve continuity. It acknowledged risk. It justified silence. Proof of intent. The room changed. Security Director 1 straightened. "This document violates protective statutes." Legal counsel nodded slowly. "It does." Camilla exhaled, finally allowing fatigue to surface. "Statutes evolve," she said. "The Crown must not." William picked up the letter. "You believed," he said, "that tradition would protect you." Camilla met his eyes. "I believed tradition would protect the institution." "And who?" William asked. "Protected the child?" No one answered. The council reached its conclusion not with argument, but with inevitability. Each member understood what exposure meant, what action would fracture, what inaction would condemn. William stood. "This council exists," he said, "to serve the crown. The crown exists to serve the innocent." He looked directly at Camilla. "You are relieved," he said, "of access pending formal removal." The words were precise, irreversible. Camilla did not protest. She rose slowly, dignity intact, calculation abandoned. "You will be judged," she said to William, "by what follows." "I know," he replied. "So will the crown." She was escorted out, not publicly, not forcefully. Protocol executed justice the only way it knew how. Quietly, completely. The chamber remained sealed long after she left. William stayed behind alone. The documents lay before him. Proof of a system that had mistaken endurance for morality. He understood now that protecting the monarchy would require breaking its most comfortable habits. The weight of hidden deeds pressed down, not as guilt, but as responsibility. He gathered the files. This would not be buried. Not again. As the signed letter is placed into permanent record, the palace crosses its final line. Because intent has been proven, and authority can no longer hide behind tradition, the palace woke that morning as if nothing had shifted. Sunlight spilled over manicured gardens. Flags fluttered in rhythm with history. Servants moved with meticulous care. Guards occupied posts with perfect form. To an outsider, all was the same. The monarchy unbroken, impeccable, eternal. Inside, the air was taut. Prince William moved deliberately through halls now marked by quiet tension. Every step echoed authority, not inherited, but chosen. The decision he carried was heavier than gold or crown, heavier even than ceremony. He would act. He would uphold the duty that generations had spoken of only in whispers. Camilla waited no longer behind closed doors. She had been summoned and informed. Today, she would leave. The order was formal, unmistakable, rooted not in anger, not in spectacle, but in the immutable principle that the crown protects the innocent first. The senior palace officer walked beside William. Guards were discreetly stationed, not for display, but to ensure precision. The palace itself seemed to lean in, observing. Every door closed quietly behind them. Every eye a witness to the inevitability of justice carried out by protocol. Camilla appeared at the appointed entrance, her presence calm, her composure intact. She wore the uniformity of dignity. No panic, no plea, only acknowledgement that centuries of precedent had finally met their challenge. William spoke first, voice measured. "Camilla, under emergency authority and by my direct command, you are relieved of access to the royal residence effective immediately." She met his gaze evenly. "And the crown?" "The crown serves life first," William replied. "Not power, not comfort, not legacy alone. This is a line that must never be crossed again." The guards moved. Each action was precise. Escort, positioning, timing. Camilla walked without resistance, understanding that resistance here was unnecessary. This was not humiliation. It was consequence. The palace had never executed punishment with this kind of restraint, and yet its impact was absolute. Staff averted eyes, not from fear, but from the recognition of history unfolding. The monarchy had acted decisively, without fanfare, without scandal. Security protocols were flawless, emotionally charged but administratively clean. Every detail ensured that while Camilla left, the institution remained untarnished. Charlotte watched from the private wing, unaware of the full intricacies of protocol, but aware that safety was restored. That was enough. The child's innocence preserved. The family's duty reaffirmed. Outside, the carriage awaited. Camilla ascended with quiet dignity. Her steps precise, each movement controlled, as though she were still within the palace's order even while departing it. The doors closed behind her. Silence followed. William stood alone in the empty corridor. The weight of choice pressed against him. Not triumph, not relief, but understanding. The monarchy had drawn its line clearly. Justice had been served, but at a cost measured in years of service, trust, and personal connection. As the palace doors shut behind Camilla, William remained, facing the consequence of his decision. The legacy of the crown would now be defined not just by tradition, but by the courage to protect those it was sworn to serve. The question lingered. What other truths still lay hidden behind these walls, awaiting the next heir brave enough to confront them? The palace had returned to its usual rhythm. Corridors were quiet. Guards resumed their patrols with silent precision. Daily routines continued. Outside, the gardens flourished as if the events of the past weeks were nothing more than a passing shadow. To the public eye, the monarchy was untouched, impeccable as ever. But inside, everything had changed. Prince William moved to the halls alone, his footsteps measured against centuries of expectation. The decision to remove Camilla, though executed with procedure and dignity, weighed on him not as authority, but as conscience. The crown, he realized, was more than history, ceremony, or political stability. It was a promise, a moral covenant to protect the vulnerable, to act decisively when silence would become violence. In the quiet of his private office, he reflected on the hidden machinery of the palace, the logs, the restricted corridors, the centuries-old statutes that allowed discretion to become harm. Tradition had served to preserve the crown, but not always to preserve innocence. For too long, the institution had protected itself at the expense of those it was sworn to defend. Now, a choice had been made, and that choice, however procedural in execution, resonated far beyond rules and hierarchy. It was a statement. Legacy exists to serve life, not power. The monarchy's strength is measured not by endurance, but by courage. The child, safe once more, was the living proof. The palace walls, silent witnesses to decades of unspoken truths, had seen a line drawn clearly. The crown, at last, had chosen protection over convenience. William looked out over grounds. Sunlight touched the stone battlements and the meticulously kept lawns. He understood that authority is not inherited. It is exercised, and when exercised rightly, it leaves a lasting legacy. The palace, serene on the surface, still harbors secrets. But one truth remains undeniable. Protecting the innocent is the crown's highest duty. The question now lingers. What other truths await discovery behind these walls? And who among the next generation will be brave enough to confront them? The palace slept under a fragile calm. Corridors echoed only with the faint, measured footfalls of guards. Candles flickered in the private wings, casting long shadows over portraits of monarchs who had ruled through silence and discretion. Outside, the gardens shimmered under the soft glow of moonlight, each leaf and flower meticulously maintained, unaware of the invisible turmoil that had riven the institution within. Prince William remained awake, seated alone in his private office. The weight of the past weeks pressed against him not as authority, but as conscience. Camilla had been removed, the emergency council convened, and the immediate threat neutralized. Yet, a lingering unease gnawed at him. The realization that actions had consequences, but silence could carry its own poison. He reviewed the documents once more, the reports, the logs, the letters, and the unsigned authorizations. Each line told a story of caution and neglect intertwined, of precedent bending toward expediency rather than justice. Patterns emerged, subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Moments where duty had been sacrificed on the altar of hierarchy. Decisions made quietly, recorded lightly, remembered selectively. The palace staff sensed a change, though they dared not speak it aloud. Whispers moved through corridors, not in sound, but in gestures, in glances, in pauses where instructions were no longer assumed to be safe. Loyalty shifted silently. Some aligned more closely with William. Some remained tethered to tradition, and others withdrew altogether, leaving spaces between the walls where shadows now gathered. Camilla's absence was felt in these spaces. Her influence lingered. Her networks, her subtle approvals, her quiet decisions, all woven into the fabric of the palace. William realized that removing her physically did not erase the shadow she had cast. It only made the consequences of her presence clearer. Authority had been asserted. But the institution itself still bore scars, invisible yet indelible. Late into the night, William walked the palace halls, observing the machinery of duty at work. He noted the meticulous order, the disciplined precision, the rituals performed flawlessly despite the turbulence beneath the surface. Yet, for the first time, he saw the fragility hidden in that perfection. The reliance on silence, the assumption that obedience equaled morality, the ease with which intent could be concealed behind procedure. He paused before a portrait of a king who had ruled in secrecy, whose reign had been marked by decisions taken in shadows. The image seemed to speak. Authority is not in command alone, but in conscience, in knowing when to act and when to prevent harm quietly, yet decisively. William understood now that his role was not only to lead publicly, but to navigate the unseen currents that define loyalty, morality, and protection. In the quiet that followed, he contemplated the next generation. Princess Charlotte, safe but aware of fragility even in comfort, would inherit not only the crown but the weight of knowledge, the realization that those entrusted with authority could also betray it silently. The palace's history would continue to whisper warnings, and it would fall to the heirs to decide which shadows to confront and which to illuminate. Outside, the moon cast a pale glow over the grounds, highlighting both beauty and imperfection. William knew that vigilance must persist not just for the crown, but for those it existed to safeguard. The monarchy's endurance depended on courage exercised in unseen corridors, decisions made quietly yet with moral clarity, and a willingness to confront shadows long before they became storms. The palace sleeps, but not peacefully. Shadows remain, silent observers of what is past and what is yet to come. William understands that authority has been asserted, yet the true test lies ahead, ensuring that history does not repeat itself behind walls designed to conceal, and that the crown's duty to protect the innocent endures across generations. The palace breathed differently at dawn. Morning light spilled across corridors that had long been neutral witnesses to ceremony, politics, and secrecy. Yet today, every shadow seemed heavier, every corner watched. The events of weeks past, the injury, the emergency council, Camilla's removal, had left invisible tremors in the institution. Guards moved with the same precision, but their eyes were sharper, their gestures smaller and more deliberate. Loyalty, it seemed, had eyes that could see even in silence. Prince William walked the halls alone, surveying the palace in a new light. Every detail mattered. Which doors remained locked, which offices were quiet, which staff avoided his path. He had acted decisively in removing Camilla, yet he knew the palace did not forgive easily. Authority had been asserted, but the institution remained layered with history, networks, and influence. In the quiet, he understood that vigilance alone was not enough. He needed insight. The senior security officer approached with a sealed folder. Its contents were not routine. Reports, observations, and testimonies had been gathered over days in near total secrecy. The palace itself had cooperated, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes out of fear of exposure. Each document carried a name, a timestamp, and an observation, small, almost imperceptible, yet together forming a map of hidden currents within the walls. William began to read. A guard had noted unusual behavior near Charlotte's private quarters, weeks before the incident. Another reported minor discrepancies in log entries, corrected later with subtle explanations. One staff member, previously considered loyal to protocol, had quietly observed interactions between Camilla and certain aides that contradicted official documentation. It was meticulous, almost surgical, the way these hidden eyes had captured reality without interfering. They were loyal, not to an individual, not even fully to the crown, but to the idea of truth, of order, of preservation through vigilance. William realized then that authority had two forms. The overt, codified power he exercised as heir, and the covert, patient scrutiny that had already been at work inside the palace for decades. Both were necessary. Neither alone could protect what mattered most, the innocence and safety of the heir. The files revealed more. Messages had been passed discreetly, instructions left unsaid, subtle interventions enacted to ensure that Charlotte's injury, though deliberate, did not escalate. It was a network operating in silence, balancing protocol and morality in ways that were invisible to most, yet critical to survival. Yet the reports also exposed vulnerability. Not everyone had acted with the same intent. Some had remained passive. Others had aligned with Camilla, following guidance that endangered the heir. The palace was not monolithic. It was a complex web of conscience, self-preservation, and institutional loyalty, each thread influencing outcomes in ways that often went unnoticed until disaster loomed. William leaned back, absorbing the scope of what had occurred. The emergency council had enforced visible justice, but it had revealed only a portion of reality. Beneath it lay a delicate ecosystem of observation, subtle intervention, and silent choices. Without it, the line between protection and betrayal blurred dangerously. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. Morning mist clung to the hedges, softening the edges of order and chaos alike. The palace itself was both fortress and stage, every corner a potential witness or conspirator. William understood that the crown's protection extended beyond ceremonial authority. It required cultivating vigilance, honoring quiet acts of loyalty, and recognizing shadows that could mask both harm and salvation. A knock at the door drew his attention. The senior officer entered, unannounced but expected. "The observations continue," he said. "Every corridor, every office, every aide. The palace is speaking, and we are listening." William nodded. "Good. Continue, but ensure discretion. The walls must not know that we know what they have seen." The officer inclined his head and departed, leaving William a profound understanding. The crown's duty was not only to command but to perceive, to protect not only in light but in shadow, to trust in the silent loyalty that often went unnoticed, and act decisively against the currents that sought to undermine duty. Hours later, William reviewed one final report. It detailed a subtle yet telling observation. Camilla, in the weeks preceding the incident, had moved through the palace in patterns suggesting preparation, not chance. The guards who recorded it had done so without interfering, allowing the palace to function normally, even as they documented her steps. The evidence was clear, and yet it also revealed the delicate balance that had prevented catastrophe. Without these hidden eyes, these watchful custodians of loyalty, the injury could have escalated, or worse, gone undetected. The palace's survival and Charlotte's safety had relied as much on vigilance and silence as on authority exercised publicly. William closed the folder. He understood now that leadership required more than decisive action. It required awareness, the cultivation of trust, and the capacity to see beneath the surface. The crown's duty was eternal, and so was its moral weight. The palace, for all its history and ceremony, was both protector and observer. Its strength lay in the hidden eyes that watched without recognition, that preserved life through quiet intervention, that ensured the line between duty and betrayal remained intact. William left the office, walking through corridors that had witnessed centuries of quiet decision-making. Each step carried the awareness that the crown's authority was not absolute. It depended on loyalty, observation, and conscience. The palace had spoken, and now he would listen. As the day drew to a close, William understood that while Camilla had been removed, the palace itself remained a living network of unseen observers. Protecting the crown and the innocent within it required constant vigilance. The shadows of loyalty, both quiet and unspoken, would shape the future, and William knew he must remain attentive to every one of them. The palace had regained its rhythm, but it no longer moved in the same way. Sunlight traced the stone corridors with an indifferent clarity, highlighting every polished surface, every carefully placed artifact, every shadow that lingered where history and vigilance intersected. Guards assumed their positions with practiced precision. Staff carried trays and documents with flawless execution. Public appearances proceeded without disruption. On the surface, tradition remained untouched. Beneath it, the palace had been altered forever. Prince William walked quietly through the halls, his presence acknowledged without comment. Every step was deliberate, a reflection of authority tempered by conscience. The events of recent weeks, Camilla's removal, the emergency council, the revelation of systemic concealment, had crystallized a truth that was more profound than any precedent. The crown existed to serve life, not protocol, to protect the innocent, even when doing so fractured the comfort of tradition. He paused before the grand library, a repository of centuries of royal knowledge, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Here lay documents detailing decisions taken in silence, records of interventions intended to prevent scandal at the expense of safety, and logs of choices that had shaped the monarchy without ever appearing in public. Authority had always been exercised, but rarely with moral accountability. William's gaze settled on one particular volume, carefully preserved yet rarely consulted. It contained correspondence that traced patterns of restraint, correction, and intervention spanning generations. The letters were meticulous, often clinical, and yet their implications were undeniable. History had repeatedly demanded moral courage, and often the institution had chosen expediency instead. He understood now that leadership was not merely the assertion of command. It was the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, the wisdom to recognize silent threats, and the responsibility to ensure that every decision preserved both the crown and the innocent under its protection. The palace staff, aware of the shift, moved with renewed awareness. Subtle gestures, an extra pause in a report, a careful alignment of schedules, discreet verification of access logs, revealed that loyalty was now measured not by obedience alone, but by commitment to ethical oversight. The institution had been reminded of its obligations. William convened a final review with his senior officers. The discussion was calm, precise, devoid of accusation, yet unflinching in moral clarity. Procedures were reinforced. Oversight mechanisms were strengthened. Access controls were formalized with multiple layers of accountability. Every measure was designed to prevent recurrence, to institutionalize protection as the highest priority, and to ensure that authority would be exercised with both rigor and conscience. In the evening, William ascended to the gallery overlooking the palace grounds. The gardens below reflected the fading light, each shadow a reminder that beauty and fragility often coexist. He considered the future, the heirs who would one day walk these corridors, the decisions they would face, the balance of duty and morality that would define their reign. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him, not as a burden, but as a defining feature of leadership. Camilla's removal had been a necessary act, yet it was only one step in a continuum of accountability. The true measure of authority, he understood, lay in vigilance sustained over time, in courage exercised without spectacle, and in the unwavering protection of those who could not protect themselves. As night settled, William reflected on the palace itself. It was more than stone, marble, and history. It was a living organism, shaped by choice, observation, and conscience. Its strength depended on the delicate balance between tradition and moral courage, between ceremony and intervention, between silence and truth. He knew that the legacy of accountability he sought to establish would not be complete in his lifetime, yet the foundations were laid. Procedures were clarified, loyalties tested, and the palace reminded that authority without conscience is fragile, but authority tempered by vigilance and ethical resolve endures. As William watched the lights dim across the palace, he understood that protecting the crown was not a single act, but continuous responsibility. The walls held secrets yet untold, but with vigilance, courage, and moral clarity, the monarchy could endure, honoring both tradition and the lives it was sworn to protect. The palace was quiet. A stillness settled over the stone corridors and polished floors, deeper than the routine hush of ceremony or the rhythm of duty. The events of weeks past, the injury, the emergency council, Camilla's removal, the uncovering of hidden patterns of intent, had left their imprint. Nothing had been erased. Nothing had been forgotten. Every wall, every archway, every shadow seemed to hold a memory of what had occurred. Prince William walked through the halls alone, not as a sovereign yet, but as a guardian of conscience. The weight of his choices pressed on him, measured not in protocol alone, but in their moral consequence. Every decision, every command had ripple effects, and the palace itself had shown him the importance of vigilance, integrity, and courage exercised quietly, deliberately, yet decisively. He paused at the gallery overlooking the gardens, the late afternoon sun casting long, gentle shadows across the lawns. The beauty of the palace and its grounds seemed eternal, unchanging. Yet he knew that true permanence was not found in stone and marble, but in the principles that guided those who inhabited them. Authority alone was fragile. Only moral clarity and a commitment to protect life could render it enduring. William reflected on the lessons learned. The monarchy is more than tradition. It is not preserved by silence or fear, but by courage tempered with conscience. Camilla's removal had been necessary, but it was only the beginning of a deeper understanding. That authority must answer to ethics, and the crown's legitimacy is measured by the safety and welfare of those it protects. He thought of Charlotte, now secure and unaware of the layers of vigilance that had kept her safe. Her future would be shaped by a palace that had learned to balance power and conscience. The hidden eyes of loyalty, the silent observers, the conscientious staff, the procedural guardians, would ensure that the lessons of these weeks were not lost, that the crown's duty remained paramount. The senior palace officer approached, standing respectfully in the shadows. His presence was both reassurance and reminder. The palace had endured, but vigilance must continue. Everything is in order, he said quietly. The systems are reinforced. Authority and oversight are aligned. William nodded, acknowledging both the accomplishment and the responsibility. Good, he replied. And the lessons? The officer's gaze was steady, recorded, preserved, ensured for future generations. For the first time in weeks, William allowed himself to exhale. The immediate danger had passed, the breach addressed, and the mechanisms of accountability strengthened. Yet he knew the work of a monarch is never complete. Authority must always be balanced by conscience. Tradition must be guided by morality, and vigilance must remain eternal. He turned back to the gardens. The light softened as evening approached. The palace itself seemed to breathe, calm yet aware, alive with history and memory. It had endured the turbulence, not by hiding from truth, but by confronting it, by allowing authority to meet conscience. In that quiet, William understood the true nature of the crown. It is not merely a symbol, not merely inherited power, but a living duty, a promise to protect the innocent, to act with integrity, and to ensure that the legacy of the monarchy is defined not by fear or silence, but by courage and care. He knew that challenges would come again. Secrets would linger. Shadows would persist. But the palace and the crown it housed would be ready, guided by vigilance, anchored in morality, and strengthened by the lessons of the past. The future could be secured. And as he left the gallery, walking to the corridors that had witnessed both peril and justice, he carried a quiet certainty. The crown must protect, always, and those who serve it must do so with conscience above all else.